Good morning. Welcome to Streaming Media Connect. This is our 13th Streaming Media Connect event. I'm Steve Nathans-Kelly, Editor-in-Chief of Streaming Media, and I will be joined this week by my esteemed co-host, Media Universe cartographer Evan Shapiro, and many of the streaming media industry's best and brightest to bring you 3 days of action-packed panels and great conversations on streaming monetization, ad tech, fast, AI, ROI, live streaming at scale, cloud workflows, new tech trends, data, metrics, OpEx, CapEx, rebundling, debundling, walled gardens, hedged gardens, and much in between. Before we get started with today's opening session, I would like to thank our diamond sponsor, Native Frame, and here is a short message from them. Tyler, let's roll the video, which has no sound. Thank you, Tyler, and thanks to Native Frame. Before we get started with this morning's opening session, a few housekeeping notes. So the music that you heard as we were playing the slide deck that opened the session, we are doing, as at previous events, we're doing a giveaway and name that tune. So you must name the artist and the track, and you must be present at the end of the session to receive an Amazon gift, a $50 Amazon gift card. And the winner will be announced at the end of the session. And so the chat is open. Please chat in the chat. And then at the end of the session, we'll also be taking Q&A, but to keep the chat and the Q&A separate, ask your questions in the Q&A and we'll get to as many questions as we can. Sessions from all 3 days this week will be available on the Stream Media YouTube channel starting next week. Links should be appearing in the chat. And save the date. We'll be back here for our next Streaming Media Connect event, November 12th to 14th. The call for speakers is open now. That link should be going in the chat as well. Now let's get started with our first session, Ad Counsel, delivering streaming ads that convert. Please welcome the man who named Fast, Alan Wolk, co-founder and lead analyst at TVREV. Take it away, Alan.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve. And welcome everybody out there in Zoom land, I guess. I was going to say TV land. We're going to be talking about, basically about measurement of streaming advertising and how we can make it more effective in order to make the ads themselves more effective. Now, the stellar panel here, and I am going to bring them on right now, and I'm going to have them all introduce themselves and explain to you why you should actually care what they have to say. I think you will find that pretty compelling. Let's start off at the top with Julie Triolo from Vivo.
Hi, everyone. I'm Julie Triolo. I'm the SVP of Research and Marketing here at Vivo. For those that don't know, it is the destination for music video. We have a significant footprint in CTV, so excited to talk a lot about that measurement and metrics in that world, as well as a very robust footprint in the digital world, especially with our YouTube partners.
Great. Thank you so much. And now let's go to Erin.
Hi, Erin Firneno, SVP of Business Intelligence at Advertiser Perceptions. Advertiser Perceptions is a market intelligence consulting company that specializes in delivering the voice of advertisers to our publisher and ad tech clients. My goal in this session today is to reference our research to help you understand the advertiser's position in this conversation.
Oh, excellent. And next we have Christina.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me on Streaming Media Connect. This is great. I'm Christina Chung, Vice President of Business Operations at Estrella MediaCo. We are a Spanish language content producer, and we distribute our content across many different FAST channels, CTV, social media, audio, and display. I oversee all the digital infrastructure and architecture. So anything ad tech, ad operations, business intelligence, that's definitely my field. And I'm very, very excited to be here.
Excellent. And last but certainly not least, we have CJ Leonard. CJ.
Alan, everyone, thanks for having me on the panel. CJ Leonard, I am an independent consultant. I have my own company, Leo Consulting, media and ad tech, anything. I find myself to be the ad tech pragmatist. So how do you make things happen? How do you execute, all the dreams that are out there? Well, litany of topics we'll go through today, but when rubber meets the road, how do you make it happen? That's generally where I slot in.
Excellent, excellent. Now, for those of you in the audience, I'd like to draw your attention to that row at the bottom in between share and show captions, where there's a little question mark and it says Q&A. Please leave questions for us. We've got a full hour here, so we'll have plenty of time for questions. So really encourage you to leave them as you think of them, and we'll get to them, in order. But we will indeed get to them, so don't wait until the end to leave your questions. So let's start off with the basic. I'm going to start off with just sort of the basic issue of measuring streaming. So for years, linear TV was measured by Nielsen, which had panels, right? They would give people, initially it was diaries, then it became sort of far more automated, but people would sort of explain what they were watching, write down what they were watching, and so they measured it. And since TV was linear, since it also sort of happened in real time, it wasn't that hard. But now we're in streaming world, and streaming is watched sort of when you want it. So that has complicated the idea of measuring it. So CJ, let me start with you. What metrics are people not getting? Like, what are some of the issues that you're seeing that people are sort of complaining, or telling you, gosh, I wish I knew more about this with streaming measurement?
No, I think one of the things with streaming measurement is, we want to get down to the user or the household, and we want to know that that person's holding that device, and we're just not there yet. And I think what I've been waiting on is the technology to catch up. We have the dream, the technology is getting there. I was doing some work with AWS over the last few months in different areas where the processing power of the log level data and so forth that would allow you to do a lot of this, it's getting there. And it's getting to the price point that publishers can engage, with advertisers and actually have a coherent conversation. But I think a lot of companies, it was Nielsen, even Arbitron was in TV ratings a long time ago. There was a battle back then, but it was far more arduous to get these, the technology out. Now you have so many companies from Nielsen to Samba, T-Vision, all these different players in the space. And, specs are great, but there's interpretation of that, right? So as much, and who's incentivized to get to, you have NBC going out there with what they have, with the one platform and so forth, getting everyone together. But those consortiums have to have money behind them, and what's going to drive those folks, and everyone's driven for different reasons. So I think it's coming together. I'm very pragmatic about these things, just because the tech is catching up.
Excellent. Julie, as a publisher, what are some of the issues that you guys are seeing? Like, what are some of the stats you're like, I wish I had that to tell people?
Yeah, so I mean, no question, there's been a seismic shift in the industry in terms of how we keep up with consumer expectations as well on these platforms. And I think publishers, platforms, programmers have been chasing after that customer journey. And so when we think about the ways in which we can create better experiences in these environments, both for advertisers and our fans, we want to think about, what is really engaging them? What are we're obviously a massive passion point, and people are highly engaged in this platform. And so attention has sort of been a really big hot topic for us, and I think in our clients, and really looking at ways in which we can measure the attention on our platform. And, as we sort of talked about, there's many providers that are able to measure attention. We're actually doing a test case in the UK. We've worked with T-Vision extensively and seen some really great growth and measurement there in terms of over time, a quarter, looking at 3 different verticals and the way that our consumers really engage with our content and ad and then back. So I've sort of been more focused on the attention piece because I think it's a really meaningful measurement, and it kind of goes beyond the reach and frequency piece.
I'm sorry, can you explain what attention is? Like, just because not not everybody may
yes.
deal with it. Yeah.
So eyes on screen, and, engaged in content. And then, so for example, the T-Vision study really showed that in even this co-viewing environment as well, that each individual had eyes on screen during content, during the ad, and then back to content. So it even shows that this sort of premium environment delivers on ad receptivity as well.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, Erin, one of the things I've heard from people is that they find that sometimes it's hard with all these different measurement, that we don't have this sort of one Nielsen anymore, that it's hard to do apples to apples comparison, that they're getting different metrics from different people, which are all great metrics, but they're like, how do I sort of match these up so it makes sense? Are you finding that as well?
Yes, very much so. Advertisers are looking for, I'm so glad Julie mentioned engagement. They're looking for engagement metrics. They're looking for outcomes in their CTV advertising. They'd like to have attribution. And one of the holy grails is to understand cross-platform effectiveness, to have visibility into their buys across the different streaming providers, across the different both CTV and linear TV. So that has been very difficult, and it is one of the major asks of advertisers.
Great, great. And Christina, are you finding that attention is, for Estrella's customers, is attention something that they are very concerned with? And what are some of the other big asks that you're getting in terms of measurement?
Yeah, I think actually the three, CJ, Julie, and Erin, touched on a lot of really good points. And I think there's an opportunity for both the buy side and the sell side to work closer together. I find that right now there is a bit of a schism in terms of what are the definitions? What are these actual metrics? What is actually important? Like what does an outcome even mean, right? And so I think that there's a definitional opportunity in the industry right now to define like what do those even mean to each partner of ours, to make sure that as a publisher, we can accommodate what the buy side wants to have and vice versa. And then to CJ's point, technology is incredibly important. And technology is not only catching up, but we're finding out ways on how to use this type of technology based on the plethora of data that we're collecting. And so I think that there is a huge opportunity right now where we need to work together, not in disparate pieces. We need to we need to make sure we share information, share data across many different systems. Whereas right now, a lot of companies, a lot of technology is behind walled gardens. And so I think that if we were to open up these walled gardens, it would allow for a lot more of this data and the experts in each of their respective fields to really take a play at what is important, what are these outcomes, and how do we make sure we provide them to our end user.
Great. That's really, so I just want to sort of ping on one key point that you made that's near and dear to my heart, which is that too often in this industry, we use the same word to describe different things, and everybody sort of has their own definition of a term, and halfway through the meeting, you're like, oh, wait, you guys are talking about two different things. That's why you don't understand each other. So the more we can sort of settle on sort of what things mean, the better off we're all going to be. So I want to talk a little bit about, you had mentioned walled gardens, and I think that's something that's really interesting. Like, Erin, what are some of the big issues, like what, in terms of people kind of going like this with their data instead of sort of sharing it out, like, and why are they doing that? Like,
right. So walled gardens definitely are an obstacle in preventing advertisers to get a clear view of their campaign effectiveness. Obviously, the reasons why publishers guard that data is because it's beneficial to them. They can offer their own measurement to advertisers, kind of what we've heard over and over again, creating their own homework. So that advertisers get some sense of effectiveness of campaigns. But there really isn't, at this point, a real incentive for walled gardens to share their data in the industry, to offer kind of holistic campaign measurement until advertisers keep pushing and advocating for change. I don't see that changing. I don't see a time when, or a time in the near future where walled gardens are like opening up their data to everyone for visibility.
Interesting, interesting. So I want to talk about, so, one of the walled garden things is with ACR measurement, right? So just for the audience, ACR stands for automatic content recognition. It's sort of how a lot of streaming is measured. And the way ACR works is it's similar to Shazam, right? If you've ever used Shazam for audio, which Julie, I'm sure, is very familiar with being at Vivo. Basically, it captures a few pixels from the screen and it matches them to a database. The databases are maintained by this company called CCR Media, which is based out of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And they sort of have logs of everything and they match it up and then they're able to know what show or what ad. But the problem, and I'll throw this to you, Julie, is right now the only people like it's, all of the different manufacturers have their own data, but they're not necessarily sharing it. I think Vizio really has been the only one that's sort of publicly selling their data, or not selling it as much as letting other people use it for measurement. Is that and
Yeah.
what's going on with that?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, sort of ACR at its redeemed state really helps capture viewing behaviors and completion rates of ads. For us, that data is captured at different levels depending on the platform. So it could be at the glass level, which is visual. It could be at the audio level. And so there's a bit of a disconnect, so there's some limitations there. And then another example is for, like if Shabuzi's Tipsy is being viewed, we don't know if that's in, the pop channel. We don't know if that's on YouTube. We don't know if it's, in the country channel. And so also the content sourcing sometimes is limited as well. So I think, you kind of nailed it. And the variety of OEMs of which Vivo exists, we don't get that passback data. So it's hard to have that universal view, which Erin was referencing as well. Advertisers are really looking for a holistic view of campaign effectiveness.
Right, right. And CJ, are we seeing, do we think that they'll share data at some point? Because that seems to be a problem that you have these huge, so just to frame it also, there's about what, like 20 million on, Vizio has a data set of about 20 million people, LG, Roku, Samsung, there's a whole bunch of companies that have this, and it's obviously much bigger than Nielsen, but, when do we get, or will we ever get to a point where there's some sort of sharing and there's some sort of national database?
Well, a couple of things. One, coming from the publisher side, I think just to key on something else that was said, I think publishers aren't exactly sure how advertisers are going to use the data. Toolbox, just like content IDs are. How do you tie all this together? I think one of the, you look at linear, you've got consortiums between Charter and Comcast and so forth. 10, 15 years ago, we were talking about sharing linear data on the cable boxes, right? I think at some point there, with the data clean rooms and so forth, how do you line things up? We have the JIC. I'm sure that's gonna, if that hasn't already, that's in, trying to advocate for that. I don't know that it's a matter more so of when, not if. But the how is going to be the question. It's how are publishers not going to feel like they're going to be penalized for or somehow lose revenue because they shared, let open the vest too much. I find that in context too, not to pivot to that, but with the context values and context IDs that are out there. I was at Iris TV for a time, had been bootstrapping that at Telaria as a corp strategy project as well. And the biggest complaint, going back to 2019 is, well, the advertisers are going to cherry pick the inventory. You're trying to get an effective CPM. I also come from places like NBC News and CBS Local, where you're trying to sell, that's not e-entertainment. That's, the DNC had a great night last night, but, there's other times when maybe someone doesn't want to be around that content, right? So I think these are all tools in the toolbox. I think eventually there's going to be some come together where there may, probably announced next week now that we talked about it because we put it out in the ether. But I think you have to look at it as a tool in the toolbox. I think having the content ID and the bid stream, how do you actually process that? Can you actually now take log level data with all this information in the bid stream and tie it back, the HLS signals and so forth? I think these are all tools in the toolbox that have to come together to build that house. So.
Gotcha. Christina, what are you seeing in terms of, you guys are on different platforms. Like, is there any talk about, hey, let's get an even universal data set, because I want to sort of frame it as that people look at digital and go, well, they know exactly who saw what, from everybody. Like, why can't you all do this in TV? And or are we able to extrapolate out from 20 million? I mean, that's a lot of people.
Yeah, so we're definitely looking at in building a bigger data set. And in doing that, we need to make sure we have the right proper technologies in place to capture that data and be able to parse through it. So we have so much data in terms of like getting it from our distributors, from our partners, from our advertisers, agencies, whoever. And each one of them has a different set of data, and merging them together is quite difficult. And so what we've been doing is we've been working with a number of our data partners to help us parse through that information to really synthesize it and then glean some insights from it. And to Julie's point before, it is a little bit difficult. Sometimes our own distributors aren't able to provide us the data that we need in order to really understand who is the end user and like how are they actually watching some of our content, even though we own the content. It's just that we have no visibility sometimes into actually what's actually happening. That being said, we do have our own platform, so we can infer how some consumers are viewing our content, as well as like, geographics, demos, and things of that nature. So we do have some first-party tools that we're able to utilize and kind of make inferences. But it is sometimes difficult for other distribution platforms that we work with, which we do many of them. We don't get a lot of that data back, and it is quite challenging.
Great. Yeah, Erin, you've been nodding along vociferously. So what's your
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously there's a lot of benefits to ACR data. It offers the visibility into both linear TV and CTV viewership. It has some level of transparency into the content that's being watched. It has a large footprint. I don't know if it's necessary to have, and I guess the two publishers here feel differently, but have a universal and have all of the OEMs get together and share all of their data. I would say we are sort of drowning in data. I think, like Christina was saying, we can make some inferences if we had just two of the OEMs, share their data. That's probably it's more than what we had to buy big screen advertising ever in the past. So that might be sufficient.
Yeah. And just to put that for people in the audience, Nielsen measures from 40,000 households. So if you're looking at against 20 million, or I think Samsung is something like 45 million. I mean, the gap is tremendous. And to your point, Erin, we managed to buy stuff off of those 40,000 households. But I did want to bring up, I'll come back to you, Julie, with this, is that there is this difference. So Nielsen was all about what they called person-based measurement, right? So you knew who in the house was watching. Because you filled out your little diary and everybody in the house had their own diary or their own automated thing. Whereas with ACR and streaming measurement in general, we're generally measuring the glass or the TV set and not, and less the people in the household. But there are some companies that are working on that. Like, how important is that for Vivo? And what have you seen that you've been like, oh, this is pretty exciting?
Yeah, I mean, I will reference TVision again. We've done a lot of work with them to identify who's in the house, who's watching the screen. 74% of our content is actually viewed with two or more people. And so, as I mentioned, the study that we did over the course of time to really revealed some amazing metrics. And so I think looking at those alternatives, and then also thinking about, when I hear you guys talk about like, we need a standardization, we need a common lexicon for measurement in general. And I think that because there are so many options, I love the optionality. I think that is actually crucial. We don't want to go back to a measurement monopoly. However, having those different platforms, data sources coming together to really establish what those best practices are and that common language so that we can have that standardization in the market is going to be really important for our advertisers and for the customer experience as well.
Gotcha. Christina, what are you guys seeing in terms of that? In terms of, again, because you're a publisher, like,
Yeah.
understanding persons versus, TV sets.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, my particular world in Estrella is digital. And so there's a lot of different metrics we get there. We really, I think for us, our most important elements are impressions, revenue, and viewership. And within viewership, it's things like minutes, sessions, uniques. And so for us, those are kind of like the key and core metrics that we do across all of our distribution platforms, all of our different layers of touch points with the consumer. And so that's the type of data, kind of to Erin's point, like those are the two or few main pieces of data that we want to get back so we can understand like how we're performing in terms of like our each distribution platform, what's the ROI associated with it. And so for us, that's very important from like a supply standpoint. And then from like, a buyer standpoint, I think in terms of data, I actually think this has to do with like, I think the world is moving into more programmatic. This existed for a long time, obviously, but, I think that, we've seen a transition of more programmatic, more things like PMPs come up into the space. And with that comes we all have to be much more diligent about the metadata that's getting passed to the buyers and making sure these buyers understand what is this metadata. And this is a continuation of what we talked about before. There's no one standardization for some of these metrics that are getting passed through. So genre, for example, we're a Spanish language company. When we first started out, we had all of our genres in Spanish, but the buy side buys in English. And so it's, I mean, that's just one very easy example of how there's a disconnect between the buy side and the sell side. But I do think money is where things are going to go towards, right? Like money has always been the driver of most things. So if we want to have some sort of standardization, I feel that it's the buy side that's going to really start to build out something to make it more standardized.
Gotcha. And are you finding that metadata is just, because I know that's been a problem in TV for a long time, that when they digitized all the shows, they didn't really put any metadata on them. It was just like Seinfeld comedy, Friends, season 3, episode 2, and that was that. So you finding that you now have more metadata, against for both the ads and also for the content.
Oh, sure. I mean, from us, like we built out our content management system to make sure we pass through essential content signals, so to speak, to make sure that our buy side at the end of the day gets those different content signals. Could be things like genre, rating, language, the most simple things. And these are things that never got passed previously. And so programmatic buyers are starting to realize like, oh, I only want these certain genres or these certain like ratings. And so that way, if we're able to pass it from like the source input, pass it through, hopefully that these guys who are on the buy side will be able to buy our inventory more optimally than previously. I think another thing too is that there is an element of, like I mentioned, standardization. Right now we have our own publisher content signals, and we have no idea whether these are really standardized. And so I think that's the trouble here, is that we might be passing all these signals, but the buy side might not recognize them because that's not in their standard set of genres or ratings. And the last piece I want to mention is that content IDs, Julie mentioned this before, or someone mentioned before, cherry picking is a big issue sometimes. I mean, we do like, the DNC, for example, that's great. We need to make sure that some of these live events, like we want to be able to capture that excess demand. But then also, we don't want them to necessarily cherry pick everything, because we also have really great content across our platforms. We don't want them to miss out on reaching some of these audiences, because it's very clear our a certain audience, and you can get that on many other content that we produce and distribute, not just on those like particular highlighted events and featured events.
Gotcha. So Erin, I want to get your POV on two things from the advertiser side. One is the importance of sort of understanding persons based versus the sort of household, and then this concept of cherry picking, which I know has become an issue with a lot of sort of conflict point between advertisers and publishers.
Sure. So yeah, that's what's missing from the ACR data. We don't have a sense. We know that the show is on, but we don't know who is watching. And I think that that is a key piece of the puzzle that's missing that advertisers are asking for. I don't have that much insight into cherry picking. I would imagine that advertisers are very pro cherry picking. And that they get frustrated by lack of inventory transparency and feeling that some of their buys are being packaged with lower quality inventory. So I'd imagine that, very pro cherry picking.
CJ, now what are you saying, since you sort of have a 360 view on all this?
Well, that I get the battle. Like I sit between it in multiple scenarios over my career, and it's still, there's a cost of doing business, right? The advertisers feed the publishers. Publishers' content is what feeds the location by which you can advertise, right? So some will say the advertising side, buy side, is more important. Some will say the pub side, depending if you're coming from my side, that's most important. You want to get, it's exchange of goods, right? So, and value. So when Erin totally sympathized with the conversation on the advertiser side, but when I think going back to a point that was made earlier, the signals in 2019, 2020, when I was working with Iris to get those values out into the bid stream, right? Then I worked with everyone from the ad server, the SSP, to the DSP on how to use those signals, right? There's a translation layer. There's the people are not looking at it necessarily on the advertiser side from that holistic, the audience piece. It's a buyer that's sitting. I've had buyers sitting in Campaign 360 and trying to do buys on audience that the mappings weren't right. Right. There's not an understanding of that. Okay, well, where are all the hops in this process and how do they all connect or disconnect? Right. And I think that's one element where, again, kind of why I went to consulting was how do you bridge those gaps? Because I would sit on the I would sit on the CBS local or NBC, and then I went to Telaria and I was or Iris, and I'd sit there and go, oh, it's someone to connect the red wire into the red port. That's as simple as some of this stuff is. And people are like, no, it's fraud. It's fraud. I'm not saying, and I have seen ethical issues out there. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but more often than not, I think it's an interpretation issue.
Gotcha. I do want to quickly encourage everybody. We have one question up there already, and know that you can ask your questions anonymously. So if that kind of putting your name on it makes you a little bit nervous, you can ask the questions anonymously. So the next I want to talk about is, we were talking about definitions and how everybody's sort of all over the place. And one of the areas where it's confusing is that streaming depending sometimes gets lumped, gets put together with traditional linear TV, and then sometimes it gets put together with digital, with online video. And I know for myself, I'm always having to go, wait, which bucket was it in when you gave me these stats and all that. Now, Julie, you guys probably get a decent amount of viewing, on phones and on other devices. Like, how easy is it for you to get measurement that sort of tracks across CTV, which we'll define as, being watched on a TV set, and and the same Vivo content being watched on another device?
Yeah. So, with our preferred measurement partners, we are able to look at cross device. And I would say, for us specifically, we had just launched a custom research study to understand customer expectations or consumer expectations in the world of CTV. And it was really clear that those expectations are that the CTV ads are as relevant, as personalized as digital. The expectation is that it is equivalent to the content that they're watching in these premium environments. I come from a little different purview, given that our entire content suite is premium. But I think that was a real signal for us to really kind of align with the digital regulations and measurement around our CTV footprint. And so we're really working towards that. And as this sort of the name and theme of this webinar is centered around conversions, I think that's the next layer. So we have our brand lift, we have purchase intent, content. We have all of these great measurement partners to help us get to those, standard reach and frequency measurement and metrics. And now we want to go one step deeper, even beyond the intention piece, and look at what are those conversions that clients are really going to be looking for.
Gotcha. Now, Erin, for you guys, from the advertiser standpoint, are they seeing, hey, it's the same ad, it's the same content, it's just being watched on a different device, or even sometimes just the same ad being run on online video? Do your people want to see do your clients want to see the measurement across both so they can sort of get a clearer view?
Right now, it seems that they are looking to measure premium CTV in conjunction with linear TV and, not the small screen. That the big screen requires its own unique strategy, its own unique planning, its own unique creative viewing experience, a creative experience that's separate from the small screen. So there is still that sense of linear TV and streaming TV, very interconnected. Kind of linear TV was originally, sold so much in conjunction with streaming TV when streaming TV first came out, like with linear TV almost providing the scaffolding for streaming TV originally. So that's still very connected. And I think that advertisers see the big screen as offering a unique viewing experience, which deserves a different buying and planning and creative experience.
Interesting. Now, Christina, what are you guys seeing in that regard? Are your clients looking at them similarly, differently? How is that playing out?
Yeah, I mean, I think you did touch on some really good points there. Where I feel that our clients are, and to be fair, I'm not on the sales side. I'm definitely more on the tech and operations side. So I think what Erin mentioned is definitely true for our clients as well. They are looking for exactly those things.
Excellent. Okay, so I want to, in the last time that we have, I want to turn to something that we've been sort of we've been touching on in different places. And that's contextual targeting. So contextual targeting is a really hot topic in TV advertising right now. And let me just lay it out for the audience a little bit. So initially, when streaming came out, we were looking to measure it, sort of target people by audience segments. This is how digital is largely bought and sold, because they have all sorts of data about who and what, and you can sort of target based on, whether it's purchase intent, demographics, all sorts of, whether somebody has bought the product previously. There were a lot of issues around that, which we'll talk about, but contextual targeting, and this goes to what we were talking about before, about suddenly the metadata was there that you could actually say, hey, if I'm running an ad, if I'm Domino's and people are ordering a pizza in a scene on this show, I should probably run my ad there. It also means that, hey, if there's sports content on, these sorts of brands seem to go well with it, and that makes sense. If there's a certain actor or performer that's on there, we have data that says people who like them also like these types of brands. So it's become much more based on the content and sort of fitting in. So CJ, what are some of the, I know you worked at Iris, which does a lot of, and sort of been sort of the driver of a lot of this contextual revolution, if you will. But what are some of the big things that contextual solves for, and why is it becoming suddenly so popular right now?
Well, we're talking about sets or CTV, right? Whether it's my Vizio, it's my Roku device, and so forth. Cookies aren't there, so there's a bit of inference that has to happen there. With contextual, though, you're trying to get parity in some respects with linear. People know linear; they know how they bought it for the last X number of decades, right? You're trying to get parity. So I think context does two things. One, I worked at a company that people just wanted show names and they weren't getting that. This is going back 6 years, right? Advertisers, OMG was looking for a show name. We weren't able to provide it. We were trying to, right? When you get down to some of the work that you're doing with the content IDs, though, you're able to now, again, through technology, decode that. And we're, when I was at Iris, we were working with the DSPs to make sure they were not only seeing it, but then able to extract it, decode it. Could they transact against it? Really, the reporting was the biggest piece, from my standpoint, was the biggest innovation, because you had, to your point, Erin, before about the transparency aspects, it was going to open up the doors there. But as far as context, we had a Kevin Hart campaign that was running for Chase. And anytime Kevin Hart came up, the Chase wanted to target target that content. And I, coming from a world where people are geo-targeting, audience targeting, you get so limited. I was shocked when it was successful, right? Because I'm the pragmatic ops person in these situations. I think, seeing the alignment, and we talk about context, but also there's the privacy aspect. We have the alignment, all of these things, like context in and of itself is great. I think it's a great tool to, if you wanted show name, not only you're getting, you may not get show name exactly, but you can probably infer a lot of that in the systems now with the key values that are coming through. I think there's still a whole world out there, because context in prior lives meant one thing, and now in digital, I mean, you can get down to it's semantically what ComScore or Curve might score something as. You could sit there and go, oh, I've got 13 data sets to work with, and I really like ComScore, and I want to do anything that's positive, and sports, the options are, the optionality there is just so dramatic compared to, well, I just want to buy Seinfeld in the 7 o'clock, syndication slot on channel 17 in Philadelphia. Like, that's a whole different way of thinking. The granularity there, we're going to have to change how we think about buying television. And again, it goes back to, I don't want to bring this up, but premium. That's a very subjective topic. That, an audience ages 18 to 4, that's, auto intenders, that's a different conversation than, those folks, we talk about the Yule log. I've been told advertisers don't want to buy the Yule log. Well, there may be a time when you want to buy the Yule log, as a streaming channel. Julie, you probably get into it's with Vivo, it's music videos and music content. Maybe someone has it on in the background. Sure, you have attention conversations there where it's like, how do you draw someone back when they walked away in the middle of the Taylor Swift video? So I think we have all of these options now. We have to look at these things differently. I'm working with a startup that's trying to create more engagement in the break and give advertisers more control in the break. And all these signals are required, though. Geo, context, so forth. It's all coming together where maybe CTV it's just parity right now, but we're just scratching the surface on the innovation that's to come.
Gotcha. So Christina, CJ just mentioned privacy. How much how is contextual solving for that, and how much of an issue is, what is the issue in that, and how is it solving for it?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, contextual is actually a really interesting topic for Estrella. I find that we have a number of hurdles internally, or just generally in publishers, whether you have things on-prem or if you have things in the digital ecosystem. And a lot of times these contextual signals are placed when the content is in the cloud, right? For a lot of publishers, we still have a lot of our content on-prem, and we also have to make sure that the linear channels are set up correctly, and it's all through a master control of sometimes a very antiquated system. And it's very difficult to sometimes add these additional constant signals for contextual targeting and layer it on top of some of these antiquated systems. So I think there's a challenge where we have in terms of getting publishers, getting companies to the next level, because we're still sitting on very old systems, and we need some of these old systems because that's how we're operating today. So there is an opportunity where we need to adjust these in terms of the things like privacy. I think it's something that we are very much aware of, and part of the reason why we haven't fully gone full force into things like contextual is because of exactly that. There are so many regulations right now where contextual is potentially a great thing for many, many different reasons. But it's also is the government going to shut down contextual signals? I know I was on a Google symposium specifically for the privacy, and they were saying how that the government may not accept content signals that are coming from contextual signals. And that's something that I'm not very familiar with, but it's something that, hey, I need to be aware of, because if I'm going to be implementing new technology and in 5 years it's going to go away. I don't know if I have the resources for that. So I think from like an operation standpoint, we need to be careful of like what's actually going to happen with regulation and privacy.
That's it. I mean, that's very interesting because generally it's positioned as the antidote, to privacy concerns, that rather than targeting specific people based on data about them and where they live and who they are, it's just like, okay, here's this type of show, and if you'll reach the same audience more or less than if you use people. So that's interesting. So I wanted to, the other thing that contextual is sort of known for is that people talk a lot about news, that a lot of times advertisers were afraid to buy on news shows because there's that classic where they're bombing Kiev and the air raid sirens going off, and then there's this funny, I think it was Applebee's commercial running next to it. But they found with contextual, most news programming is not doom and gloom. There's a lot of 12 things to bring on your next beach vacation, or woman celebrates 105th birthday at nursing home kind of stuff. Now, I'm assuming, Julie, you get some of that too with Vivo, that in other words, people like, oh, I don't want to run against rap video or this or that, but is contextual a good way to say, hey, like this is nothing to be afraid of?
Yeah, 100%. We've spent a lot of time on proprietary capabilities in the contextual space. And like you, Alan, I've always known it to be sort of the antithesis of what we were wrestling with like cookie deprecation and GDPR and CCPA and all of these things. And so taking sort of a left turn and looking at really building out matching the advertising to the context and ensuring that audiences that are watching these particular videos, are matching with what is expected from an advertising standpoint. So we've used a lot of metadata to signal sentiment. So we'll kind of like categorize videos in the sense that like joyful or heartfelt, which is like Mother's Day, Valentine's Day. We'll do like empowering. We'll have like all of these different sort of categories where each video is tagged with metadata so that it matches what the advertiser sentiment is looking for in that particular context. We also have things like Vivo Rewind. We do a whole taxonomy of advertiser creative to match the sight, sound, and motion of their creative so that it's a seamless viewing experience, so that it matches, the videos plus the ads. And so, yeah, the contextual piece has been a very much a hot button as well. And I feel like with your news example as well, I did come from Warner Brothers Discovery. And so the brand suitability piece was really big in ensuring that we had those sentiment tools to bring advertisers into the place that they wanted to be in that news context was really important as well.
Gotcha. Now, Erin, for advertisers, like, how are your clients looking at this, and the ad community in general? Is the ability to sort of match the tone and the emotions to the content a good thing, or do they still want the people, or can you do both?
Right. Yeah, I would say that advertisers are very enthusiastic about contextual targeting. I think it kind of offers them what was offered on linear TV on in the past, historically on CTV, which gets them excited. Yeah, absolutely. You hear, like you mentioned the story about the news, advertisement, you hear about, the dating app that shows up in a, serial killer documentary, not great. So advertisers are very brand safety focused, and they feel that contextual targeting can help address those concerns.
Okay.
I
So
have
in the
a quick
remaining
curiosity though, Alan, before we jump from that topic, I'm actually very curious. As a publisher, we work with a lot of different ad servers, and there's not many of them that are very focused on contextual targeting. So I'm very curious to hear from, Julie, Erin, CJ, like how, like as a publisher who wants to do more contextual targeting, because I know that's the future. I know that like using AI and all of these things, contextual is like a perfect solution for that, right? But I'm also very curious about the ROI. Are people actually like investing, or people, meaning the clients, the advertisers, agencies, are they actually investing dollars in contextual targeting today? Because I find that, or at least from us, a lot of our tech teams and our tech partners, they're not really as focused on contextual targeting at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a huge boom. And in fact, there's an article that was just released from Streaming Media today about fast channel contextual targeting and the CPMs that can be garnered through that. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of spotlight and it's very much a hot topic.
Just one piece though, because Christina and I have had conversations in the past when I was at Iris. I think one of the things about context though is that, again, going back to this interpretation piece, someone sells context to an advertiser, and then the execution layer, it's Iris, it's Peer 39, it's AWS has a solution now that we were touting at NAB that publishers can put in. Like it's still, I think when I was at Iris and I was at Telaria, I thought this would be a lot sooner. And I don't want to speak for Iris. I haven't been there in over a year, so I can't speak for what they're doing right now. But I think there's still this scale, right? Like you get the advertiser bought in, and then the tech on the publisher side had to get upgraded, and then the DSP would have to get on board with the signals getting implemented into their systems. And so I think we're still early. The concept is there. Everyone's bought into the concept. It's that rubber meeting the road. It's connecting the dots. It's making sure that, there's an ampersand not messing up the bid stream call, the VAS call, ad requests, things like that. I mean, that's where we're at, I think, with context, is that there's still a lot of, I don't want to say ditch digging, but there's still a lot of that has to happen to make sure that all the, what we do for geo-targeting, what we do for, audience targeting, that it's actually fully implemented in each one of the systems. And, we did a lot of work with Publica and SpringServe when I was at Iris to get that implemented. Again, I haven't been at Iris in over a year, but, I think it's still, Christina, you're still at a disadvantage because I won't get into this now, but the way client side works and server side and all these other, we could map one road and then couldn't map the other roads, like say to, fast might be mapped and then BOD couldn't be, that type of thing.
I think Steve,
still
to your point, it's to your earlier point, technology is still catching up, right? And so I think at the end of the day, like we see the future in contextual targeting and contextual signals, but the technology hasn't quite gone there. So it's a simple turnkey solution that we can do. And so I think that's where we're having difficulties. Like, what is the ROI here? Are we actually going to get dollars to suffice for these technology integrations that we're going to work on?
And the scale, dollars and scale. That's all what it comes down to.
Yeah, I mean, I will chime in quickly that we're doing a big report at TVREV. They'll be out in October on contextual targeting. There's a lot of new companies in the space, and companies like Iris that are existing or expanding what they're doing. But just Grace Note, Curve. There's a new company called Inoki, Whirl, Iris. They're all doing really cool stuff in it. And I think in the next year, you'll see a lot more advancement. I want to go quickly. I have time for, I'm going to take one question here from Nick Hart from Think Analytics. I assume that's you, Nick. Are true one-to-one personalized ads possible on distributed content with the current walled gardens / lack of data sharing you discussed earlier? Does anyone want to take that? We do true one-to-one. Anyone? CJ.
I want to say it's a matter of when and not if. I think, everyone's got a device in their hand, or it's within, who doesn't have a cell phone over the age of 13 anymore. So, how do you combine that technology to, be the people meters of the past? I'm working with a company now that's trying to increase engagement at the ad level. And there's a level of login when you see an ad and so forth. And so I think it's a matter of when, and with the devices that are, over the age of 13, even children have their own, kid iPads. I mean, you could probably, it's a privacy issue at that point, though.
Gotcha. Okay, one more here. So an anonymous attendee. What is the panel's thoughts on the rise of streaming bundles? How will streaming platforms bundling their content impact advertisers' ability to measure ads effectively? Are brands / advertisers excited by the potential of these bundles? Erin, that seems like something.
Sure, yeah, I can take that. Yeah. We just released our CTV landscape report where we asked streaming advertisers what solutions are particularly important to them when choosing a provider. And the ability to buy across streaming providers through one provider or across linear and streaming through one provider was at the top of the list. So it's very, very appealing. This idea of bundling is very appealing to advertisers. I think in that case, if you're buying from one provider, the measurement capabilities are easier because you're dealing with typically a walled garden who can give you viewing into the performance of your campaign across all of their properties.
Excellent, excellent. And then one quick one, either Julie, this seems to be for Julia Christina, and from Howard Rosenberg, do any of the publishers have security mechanisms in place in order to make sure the content that you send arrives at a target audience as was intended?
So
Well, sure.
we definitely have distribution platforms. So we have certain content for specific distribution platforms. So we don't necessarily have a content specific to a certain individual, but we do have it by platform basis. As an example, we have a great opportunity with Curiosity Stream, and they are on our Samsung TV Plus partnership. And so that's an example of making sure that we have different content on different distribution partners. But that's very much here's the content on this distribution platform. It's not like a automated here's content in different distribution places.
Right,
Okay.
and for us, same thing. I mean, all of our videos are tagged with metadata, and therefore, if there are certain videos that you want to deprecate, then that is fine. If there are certain target audiences you want to go after, we have targeting capabilities, and so yeah, those would be, I guess, the security mechanisms.
Okay, well, we are at time now, so thank you all very much. You guys were great. This is amazing. Thank you, audience. I saw there was a huge chat going on in the chat section there. I haven't had a chance to look at it. And thank you to all of you who asked questions. Sorry we couldn't get to all of them. Time is like that. Again, and thank you, Steve, for having us all. And good afternoon, good morning, wherever you may be.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks, Ellen. Thanks, Julie. Thanks, Erin. Thanks, Christina and CJ. Thank you so much. And thanks to the audience. As Ellen said, it was a great discussion here and in the chat. Just before we go, I want to congratulate Beth Rosen, who is the winner of our gift card. She correctly identified One Mint Julep by the great hard bop trumpeter Freddie Hubbard. And we will be back in half an hour with our keynote session from Cloudinary, automating video post-production and delivery processes to boost ROI. So I hope we will see you all for that. Thank you.
Sure. Bye-bye.